it from the first Water Leaders Program from WECO. And so that was, I won't put the date, but it was a while ago. And she's a second generation front ranger. And I do have to ask this, it's like my parents were first generation, but I left the state for almost 40 years. So I'm back. So I'm not quite sure if I count as a second generation or not. So, you know, I kind of know what that means. Big changes that have occurred during our careers here. And so with that, Emily's going to be talking about the city of Thornton in their water plans. And in particular, I think you're going to be covering some of the stewardship program and talking about many of the challenges associated with that and what it's really like to be a water manager in a utility in Colorado. So with that, Emily, take it away.
Right. Well, hi, everybody. Nice to see you all. And I really appreciate the invitation to talk with you. I got a chance to look at the agendas that you've had in the past, as well as who's coming up. And it looks like a really fun class. I've actually got some of my staff that have been taking this class. We've got some new folks at Thornton, and this has just been such a great kind of education for onboarding some folks. And I think I also have some other staff that are not so new, but that are just here for moral support. So if you get any heckling in the chat from anybody at Thornton, just delete them. So what I want to talk about today, if I can, oh geez, I'm just hitting the arrow.
Try and just press this
Space.
Like that. Okay. Let's see. Oh, there we go.
What'd you do?
I just went kind of to the next. Yeah.
Oh, now it's
cool.
working.
So
okay,
now it works.
very good.
Perfect.
Okay, thanks, Tristan. So yeah, what I wanted to talk about today was just give you a little bit of an introduction to municipal water supply planning in Colorado in general, what it is, why we do it, how we do it. It's a little unique here. I want to talk a bit about the development of Thornton's water system, just because I think it's kind of a nice, it helps illustrate some of the challenges that we have on the South Platte, the Front Range, as we're developing water supplies and trying to deal with multiple uses on kind of the limited source we have here. I want to talk a little bit about your water, maybe see if you guys know where your water comes from, because I always think it's interesting for people to understand kind of their own water footprint, especially as they're learning about the Western water issues. And then I'm also just going to talk a bit about regional challenges in the South Platte, as well as some organizations and efforts that kind of help bring water users and water interests together for collaboration. So just to give you guys a sense of some organizations that are out there. My objective is just to get you all to be fans of drinking water if you're not already. So that's kind of what we're going to do today. So for municipal supply, so what I mean by municipal supply is essentially just what we drink, right? It's the drinking water that comes out of most of our taps. Most of us are connected to a municipal water supplier, even if it's not technically a city. You might be Elko, you might be Northweld, you might be City of Fort Collins. Unless you're on a well that's moving water directly into your house, you're probably connected to a municipal water supplier. And so that's what we mean by municipal supplies. It typically includes residential use, business use, industrial use in some instances, parks, irrigation, that sort of thing.
Also,
oh, should I be in front of the camera?
I'll just adjust it like that.
Thanks. And so the objective of municipal water suppliers is to make sure that safe water is available in critical uses, specifically during a drought. And critical human uses are kind of like health and safety, basic uses, you know, drinking water, showering, cleaning, and then really critical kind of institutional uses like hospitals and schools. So that's kind of the base use. Obviously, we have more water available to us in the United States than just that critical use. A lot of countries around the world can barely even meet that critical use that's required to have humans thrive. Here, we develop water systems with a little bit more elasticity so that we can use water for additional kind of more aesthetic type uses like parks and that sort of thing. So how do we do this? The biggest thing in the Western US is we focus on water efficiency and demand management. So that just means conservation. We need to be able to predict how our customers are going to use water, and we need to be able to help them manage that water so that people aren't just out there wasting water. So that's kind of the number one thing. A high quality water source water is what we're looking for typically, because that reduces the risk to public health. And so the better quality the source water, the less treatment, the less chemicals and less power you need to use in order to treat that water to drinking water standards. Here in Colorado, we try to acquire a diverse water rights portfolio. And what I mean by that is geographic diversity, as well as junior and senior rights. So looking at the agendas, you guys have kind of already had some discussions about what I mean by junior and senior rights. We also have to develop storage because we have to carry water from obviously year round, also from wet years to dry years. And then we plan our systems around a concept called firm yield. And this is essentially what your water system can do in a 3-year drought. So say we go into a drought for 3 years, how much water can you provide your customers in that 3 years? And so that's where those critical uses come in. We have to be able to provide those critical uses at a minimum. The reason we have those discretionary uses is because not every year is a drought year. We have some years where we're getting more water, and that water is available for kind of the discretionary uses. You've probably seen this diagram like 9 times in this class already. So the dilemma of Colorado, all the people are on the east slope, all the water's on the west slope. And you can see the South Platte is a skinny little thing. So we don't have a real robust water supply over here on the east side of the divide. So that's one challenge, just the geography of where the water is versus where the people are. The other challenge is variability. So variability from year to year. You guys seen this snowpack graph yet? So what this is the South Platte snowpack graph from earlier this year. On the left side, you can see what's called the snow water equivalent. That's how many inches of water are in the snowpack. And so you can see it ranges from 0 to 25. So in average on the South Platte Basin, we typically see around 15 inches of water equivalent is what that is. But you can see it ranges all the way up to 25, all the way down to a really bad year of 7. So we've got tons of variability in how much water is in the snowpack. So that's one challenge from year to year. The other challenge is as municipal customers, we don't use the same amount of water every single day. We have a lot of irrigation, even as municipal customers, whether that's our parks or whether it's our yards. And so typically you'll see this curve in a municipal water supplier's demand where it peaks in the summertime, not so much in the winter, but that means we have to build systems that can handle those peaks, and also systems that can deliver water in the winter. So that's a challenge. So how do we do this? Source of supply, that's the first component. We have to acquire or somehow get access to raw water. So that can be in the form of water rights, surface rights, wells. Some water providers have contracts with other water providers, but obviously the source of supply is coming from somewhere, right? It's a surface water that's being generated by the snow melt or something. And that's the limited supply in Colorado, right? We're limited to the snowpack, we're limited to the groundwater. That's the source of supply that we're all kind of clamoring for. And then you have to have raw water infrastructure. You have to get that raw water to the place of use. And so think back to that snake gut diagram. All of that west slope water, a lot of that comes over to the east slope. By way of trans-mountain diversion. So that's east slope providers looking for a source of supply that they can bring over. So that's the raw water infrastructure that conveys that. So that's big storage reservoirs, pipelines, pump stations, tunnels. We've got pipes and tunnels and pump stations all over the state, moving water from the west slope to the east slope, moving water from rivers to towns. There are very few places where a city or a municipal provider is built right next to their source of supply. Just doesn't really happen in Colorado. So there's pipelines and storage reservoirs everywhere. Once you get it to that place, then you have to do your treatment and distribution infrastructure. So we have to treat water to make sure that it meets drinking water standards, and then distribute it out to the customers. And so that's where you get water treatment plants, the water tanks that you see on hills. Sometimes that's usually clean water that's going out into the pipes, that's going into the homes. Again, pump stations, and then some municipal suppliers develop non-potable systems. And then, as I mentioned, demand management. We got to understand what the customers are doing and make sure that their behavior is kind of predictable. And so we do that through metering and customer efficiency programs. So that's Municipal Water Supply 101. So I want to talk a bit about Thornton's source of supply now, because you can kind of see how we started developing our water supply. We're kind of new to the game. Thornton was incorporated like in the 1950s. So we're a relatively new suburb, especially when you look at comparing cities like Fort Collins or Denver that have, been cities since the late 1800s. So we were new to the game. We were incorporated in the 50s. There was a small water provider that was providing that service area at the time. It's primarily using Clear Creek and South Platte supplies. So those are kind of our neighboring rivers. In the 70s, Thornton was acquiring local supplies. We were acquiring Clear Creek supplies, South Platte supplies. The challenge that we were facing, though, is that we're downstream from the city of Denver and all of that Denver area. So our South Platte and Lower Clear Creek supplies are significantly degraded. Wastewater treatment plants are above our intakes. Stormwater from the cities are above our intakes. And so we have some really serious water quality challenges, especially on the South Platte. And so the city was growing quickly, like was happening in the 70s around here. And the city joined with Denver Water on a big reservoir project called Two Forks Reservoir. Has anybody heard of Two Forks? Raise your hand if you wouldn't mind. Okay, so a handful of you. So Two Forks Reservoir was really the last gigantic reservoir project that was proposed. It's 1.1 million acre feet. It was Denver Water in 40 suburbs. And this Two Forks Reservoir was going to provide basically all of the water for Denver and the suburbs out into the future. 400,000 people would have been able to rely on Two Forks. The mid-'80s is kind of when environmental laws started coming into effect. The community started becoming much more aware of the impacts of these big water storage projects. And so there was a ton of opposition to Two Forks. Thornton started realizing that this opposition was pretty significant. Two Forks was also just going to give us more South Platte water, which was causing us all kinds of quality challenges. So we bailed on Two Forks in the late 80s. And sure enough, the EPA eventually vetoed that project and it went kaput. I argue that Two Forks was really one of the projects that kind of sent all of these water providers scattering. This was the source of supply. This was the future. Now everybody was on their own and kind of turned into all this competition. You guys have heard about buy and dry, agricultural transfers. It really sent all of these individual water providers scattering for additional supplies. And Thornton being one of them, we were just a little ahead of the game. So that's how we came up and ended up acquiring shares in the Poudre River, which I'll talk a little bit about. How does that show up? It's kind of a hard one. This is just a schematic of our water system. We've got a really great geographically diverse water system. I mentioned that that's kind of one of the tenets. We've got water in South Platte. We've got water in Clear Creek. We've also got water in the Poudre. If you track water conditions, you'll notice that sometimes there's a drought going on in one basin and not in the other basin. Water conditions all throughout the state can vary. So having this geographic diversity really helps kind of bolster your water system. So we've got a great water portfolio in terms of geography. We've got a great portfolio in terms of junior and senior rights. We've got great junior or senior direct rights. We've also got lots of storage. We've got some alluvial wells. So we kind of have this nice mix of water. And so our current system is the Clear Creek, Upper Clear Creek, Lower Clear Creek, and South Platte system. The Poudre River system is our future supply. I'll talk a little bit about that. But you can kind of see from the map, we're spread out. We're trying to consolidate kind of all of the water rights that we own in these reservoirs that are along the South Platte that are adjacent to our treatment plants. They're kind of our terminal reservoirs. But it's a pretty neat system, and it's a pretty fun system for our staff to manage and decide what water they're moving from place to place. So let's talk a little bit about the Thornton's Northern Project or the Thornton Water Project. Could you raise your hand if you have heard about Thornton up here? If you've read articles about the water that we own in the Poudre River system. So as I mentioned, when Two Forks was faltering in the 80s, the Thornton divested itself of it, and we decided we needed to go and look for an alternative source of supply, high quality, that diversity that we were looking for again. And eventually we ended up acquiring water rights in the Water Supply and Storage Company system. We call that WISC for short. WISC is a ditch company, essentially. WISC has a really robust system. It owns the Grand River Ditch in Rocky Mountain National Park, Long Draw Reservoir, Chambers, the WISC reservoirs on the plains, Black Hollow. So it's got Trans Mountain rights that come over from the Grand River Ditch. It's got really senior Poudre River rights, and it delivers its water out to the farms all the way out past, east of Alt. And so what Thornton did in the 80s was we acquired farms and water rights in the WISC system, just under half of the company. And so what you see on this map is the dark blue line is the Larimer County Canal, which is the primary canal that WISC uses to deliver water. And then all of the kind of minty green shapes, those are farms that Thornton owns and we purchased the water rights from. So we are a significant landowner in Weld County. We own some land in Larimer County, but all in total, we own around 18,000 acres of farmland in Larimer and Weld County. We purchased it for the water rights. So this kind of gives you an idea of our geographic extent. So this was done in the 80s. Let's see what my next slide is. It's always a mystery to me. So from the 80s, we acquired our water rights, 110 farms. We originally acquired around 21,000 acres, but we've sold a few thousand acres. Since 1985, we've actually held an office in Alt. We have 3 Thornton staff members that work in Alt to manage these lands with the farmers that are farming our properties now. We spent 12 years in water court. I think Jennifer Gimble told you a little bit about water court. Our case is kind of legendary. It's called Thornton v. Bijou. And if you ever go to law school and study Colorado water law, you will learn about this case. We went to water court here in Greeley. It got appealed up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court remanded it back down to the water court with some guidance. And we eventually got a decree in 1998. So 12 years in water court. It was a knockdown, drag down. And what ended up with was a big water rights decree that we have to adhere to. And it's very protective to the ag lands. It's also very protective of the river and other water users. And it's kind of served as the template of a lot of these agricultural to municipal transfer decrees, especially in the WISC system. So water court, the water project is what you've been hearing about in the news lately. That's the pipeline that we need to build in order to move the water that we own from the WISC system down to Thornton. So water rights have been acquired, gone through water court. Now we're building the conveyance infrastructure in order to physically move that water down. So those pipelines that I talked about that are pretty common to move water to where it's needed. And then also I'll talk a little bit about our stewardship plan, which is our management of these agricultural properties. So as I mentioned, just want to give you guys a little taste of what's going on with the water project. Again, this is the conveyance infrastructure for our water supply and storage company shares. It'll take water from the water supply and storage company reservoirs just north of Fort Collins and put it into a pipeline and deliver that down to Thornton. So there's a raw water pump station at the WISC reservoirs, and then a pipeline, an underground water pipeline to Thornton. It's really important for folks to know that our project does not have any new diversions on the Poudre River. This is not NISP. There's no new diversions out of this project. What we're doing is we're using the water rights that we own in the WISC system, which has been diverted through the Larimer County Canal since the late 1800s. So it's the same amount going to the same reservoir. The difference is when Thornton starts taking that water, it won't be going out to the farms, it'll be going to Thornton. So there's not a river impact with this project. There is an impact to the agricultural community. And that's why we have such a big investment in that, in what we're doing up in the ag community. So let me shift a little bit to this Northern Property Stewardship Plan, which is this ag partnership that I wanted to share with you. Thornton's water rights decree or transfer decree is kind of what's viewed as a typical ag to municipal transfer. It's like old school buy and dry. It's what you hear people don't want happening anymore, which is the permanent dry up of agriculture to meet municipal needs. The water plan, that the state's water plan really tries to say we don't want to do that anymore. And even though, as I mentioned, it's protective of the ground and it's protective of the river, it is kind of an old way of doing things. And so what we've done is we've, as a member of the communities that we surround, we've heard over the past 30 years that our presence up there, our land ownership up there, is challenging for those communities, because some communities we have landlocked with ownership. It's challenging for the farmers because they don't know what our plans are. And so we've kind of listened to that and tried to think of, okay, instead of thinking of Thornton as this controlling entity that owns 18,000 acres and is just not letting anybody do anything, what if we changed that and tried to be more of a stabilizing force? We have to meet our water supply objectives, but what if we listen to the communities to hear what they want to have done with those properties? Listen to the ag community to see, you know, are there areas that they'd like to keep in irrigated ag for longer? Are there alternative agricultural values that we can do? So it's a completely voluntary effort that we started back in 2018. And I have to be honest, it's kind of my passion project. I was really excited when the city was willing to look at planning in a slightly different way than we had historically. And so we've been in this planning process since 2018, and we're just now wrapping it up. So I'll tell you a little bit about what's going on. Refresher, this is the properties that we're talking about. So you can kind of see, I don't know, this is the town of Alt. We totally surround them. So that's kind of what we're trying to do. How do we manage these properties, ultimately divest of these properties so that we can get them back into local hands, and so that we can hopefully have them be used for ways that the local communities want them used. So the calls to action that came out of, oh yeah, you got a question?
I just had a quick question. If you could orient us on that previous map of where the pipeline is then?
Sure. So the reservoirs in the upper that are kind of in pink right here, can't quite reach that. That's where the pipeline will start. And then it'll kind of go due east-ish. We don't have the alignment completely figured out. And then right around here at the county line, it goes south for about 62 miles. So it's about 10 miles out of Larimer County, 62 miles or so through Weld County and into Thornton. And we're building that section. The 62 miles, we've already acquired all the easements. We've got all the permitting we need, and we're building. It's the 10-mile stretch that you guys keep probably hearing about up here. So thanks for that question. Yeah.
I just had a question about, you said you wanted to divest from the lands and then give back. So then that would just be like, they would just be lands no longer.
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about kind of what that might look like, right? So in the stewardship plan, the calls to action that came out of it from this community-driven process are, you know, agriculture is important. How do we maintain the key components of the region's agricultural heritage? How do we support transitioning ag economies, right? Thornton isn't the only pressure on ag up here. Ag has pressure coming at it from every direction. And so is there a way that we can support that transition, again, by being that stabilizer? Promote economic diversification in some of these communities. A lot of them are very heavily reliant on a singular type of ag. And so in order to have more resilient economies, how do we kind of partner with them or use our lands to meet their objectives? Address a future up here with 1 million residents. There's a lot of pressure growth-wise. And then also, how can we help advance regional approaches to land and water planning? In Colorado, we're getting better at planning land use and connecting it to water, but we're not great. And so that was the other thing that we wanted to do here. And we heard that the communities wanted to do through this process. Just shout out, I always have to thank our funders because, you know, we really didn't want to be, Thornton is up here master planning the northern communities. So we reached out to some outside funding to make sure that it was a really balanced approach. We contributed funding, but we also got money from the Bureau of Reclamation and a Water Smart grant. The Colorado Water Conservation Board was a huge champion of this project, and they helped fund us, as well as the Department of Local Affairs. Community-driven process. This is what we've been going through since the early 2020. So I mentioned we started in 2018. That first part was a lot of internal data gathering. But we've essentially spent the last 3 years really engaging with various members of the communities. We have a steering committee of around 25 people that have helped shape this kind of land use vision. We've met with school districts, especially in Weld County, since we kind of surround them, all of the communities, the town of Weld, town of Eaton. Really great community engagement. I think my favorite thing that has come out of this, oh, it wasn't a community open house, it was a community open house. Sorry for that. I think my favorite thing is that folks actually gave us a chance, which I didn't think they would do. We have some baggage up here. Thornton, a lot of people don't want to talk about to us. A lot of people have some animosity resulting from our original acquisition in the 80s, which is completely understandable. But we really are trying to do things differently. And so I was really thrilled that people actually were willing to give this process a shot and work through it with us. So this is our steering committee. Just need to thank them because they spent about 2 years with us. You'll see we've got a really broad group of people from government folks, Larimer County, Weld County, the different towns. We've got some conservation entities like Nature Conservancy and Colorado Open Lands. Obviously got a lot of water people because that's important. So it was just a really great process, and these folks contributed a huge amount to moving this process forward. So what is it? It's really 2 pieces. There were 2 studies that came out of it. The first was this land use assessment, which is what all the communities want to see on these different Thornton properties, right? Some are really good candidates for maintaining irrigated ag as long as possible. Some are great candidates for dryland grasses that we have some grazing on. One particular property is a pretty good candidate for a potential future school site for the school district in Weld County. So all of the properties have now kind of have some data around them about not just what we need to get out of it from a water supply standpoint, but what the communities want to see. And we also wanted to be able to identify some tensions, like one community wants it for one thing, another community wants it for another thing, a farmer wants to buy it. We just wanted to understand what sort of tensions existed on each one of these properties so that when it goes time to divest of them, we understand who our partners might be and who we might need to bring along if we're doing something that seems like it might be out of their objective. So it was really a really helpful tool for Thornton too, to help be able to make some of these decisions as we move forward. The second outcome was a really cool thing. It's just really hard and complicated, but it's a water optimization study. So Thornton's water decree, it's not an ATM, not an alternative transfer mechanism, which maybe you guys heard about, but it does allow us to re-irrigate Thornton properties with non-Thornton water. And so this water optimization study got kind of a small subgroup of folks together from our steering committee to study that part of the decree and study some potential different water sources that could be used to re-irrigate that property. It's really challenging because water prices up here are very expensive, but it also, the idea is, can we help possibly consolidate some of the irrigated ag land so that the ditch system could be operated a little bit more efficiently. Ag producers tend to like to be near each other because a lot of times they share equipment. They don't have neighbors kind of complaining about their operations. And so we were looking at kind of geographic consolidations. So it's been a really interesting study, and it's a little bit of a roadmap now for how we might be able to manage these properties into the future. So this is a complete about face, but one of the things I did want to talk about, so now you understand Thornton's system. I think, you understand that we've got water coming from Clear Creek, South Platte, we've got reservoirs, pipelines. We're trying to build a big pipeline, not so big compared to some of the massive pipelines and water infrastructure already in the ground. Do any of you know who your water provider is? Okay, you're nodding. Could you share?
Yeah, we get our water
from the city of Fort Collins. Okay, who else gets their water from the city of Fort Collins? Did you raise your hand? Okay. Do you know where their water comes from? CBT and Horsetooth. So, and I know Brad was here last week. So where does CBT come from? Lake Granby. So it's a Trans Mountain diversion moving that Colorado River water over into Horsetooth and then to the city of Fort Collins. They do also have some Poudre River rights, some native rights, but it is a trans mountain diversion. So that's an interesting thing to note, is that a lot of the water in the Poudre River is actually not native water. It's water that's coming from the Colorado River Basin. So that's one of the big, there are lots of trans mountain diversions, but the CBT project is obviously one of the bigger ones. Yes, ma'am.
Can you talk about the difference between native water and senior water? I've heard
Oh yeah,
those two a couple.
that's a great question. I'll repeat it for the people online. What's the difference between native water and senior water? So native water, think about native water as just a source of water, right? So it's water that originates in that basin, without any diversions, trans mountain diversions or anything like that. So each watershed, each river has a certain amount of native water that just gets generated from the snowpack that melts into that river. So native water is without any human interference. And then senior water rights are kind of the very first take of the water right in that river. And so I think I remember Jennifer had a slide of kind of senior versus junior. So somebody that used water first, maybe has an 1860 priority for 100 CFS, they get first dibs at that water. So that makes them a senior water rights holder. There's no line in the sand where something becomes senior or junior. It's just kind of relative, like things just get more and more junior all the way down the line. But typically we think of senior water rights as water rights that were appropriated like in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and they pretty much get water almost regardless of natural conditions, right? Even in droughts, a senior water right is going to get water, which is why they're so valuable to municipal suppliers, because we need to make sure that your faucets turn on 365 every single year. So we go after senior water rights. Anybody else have Fort Collins Loveland Water District? No. Elko, anyone's got Elko water you know of? So it's all pretty much Fort Collins. I'm not sure.
Aurora water
Oh,
from
someone's got
Aurora water from the Arkansas River,
Yep.
southern Colorado, with Colorado Springs.
Yep, Aurora and Colorado Springs share a really big trans mountain diversions on the Arkansas River. Anybody else online got different water? Thornton people, you can't talk because we just went through it. Denver water, obviously, probably not too many Denver water folks, but trans mountain diversion, Dillon Reservoir. You guys go up 285. I know you got so many great things this side of but 285, you can see the Roberts Tunnel divert water into the South Platte River on 285, and that's water moving from Dillon Reservoir under the mountain into the South Platte River. So there's trans mountain diversions all over, and most of the big water providers, Aurora, Denver, Springs, Fort Collins, rely on trans mountain diversions. Thornton, actually, we don't have any. We just have the little slice of the Grand River ditch that is owned by the Water Supply and Storage Company. So our portfolio is almost entirely native. Native South Platte, native Clear Creek, native Poudre River supplies. So cool. Okay. I just always like to get people to think about their drinking water.
Well, this is Ryan Van Pelt with the city of Loveland. I work for the city of Loveland, but I live in Fort Collins. But our water supply for the city of Loveland is about 50% trans basin and about 50% native, Lake Thompson River water.
Yep, that sounds about right. Yeah, those native supplies or those trans mountain supplies are interesting. I won't get too far off, but when you start talking about big Colorado River issues, that's why a lot of Front Range entities are actually tracking stuff on the big river, on the Colorado River, is because they are reliant on those water supplies. And so if things, well, I can't say if things go south because they are going south, but as things continue to get stressed on the Colorado River, there will be pressure on this side of the divide because of our reliance on those trans mountain supplies. And that pressure kind of turns around and puts more pressure on our native basin water rights, South Platte, Poudre River water rights. And so imagine Brad Wynn talked a lot about last week about kind of wanting to make sure that the Poudre water rights stay in basin because he's getting nervous about the Colorado River issues.
I know we're close to time, so you
Yep.
can totally save this question for the end, but I'm curious, since most of the water is used for agricultural use, what kind of like conversations, it sounds like you're doing a really great job of really getting people up to the table, like the conversations in agriculture about the reality of
Yeah.
how the city.
Well, that was a very lovely segue into, so I'll try to cover that in this issue, or in this next slide. But the roundtable process is one of the things that Karen asked me to talk about. So there was the water plan, the state water plan, and then there was also the Colorado Water for the 21st Century Act. And what that did is it established roundtables for each of the 8 river basins in Colorado. Plus it carved out this, I find it hilarious, this hilarious little roundtable for the Metro Basin. We don't have a river, we're just a roundtable, but they knew that there was so many issues going on in the metro area that the Metro Basin got its own roundtable. And the whole point of these roundtables is to talk exactly about what you're talking about. There's a gap between projected supply for municipalities and the growth that we're seeing in terms of people. Where is that gap going to come from? Is it going to come from ag? Is it going to come from new storage? Is it going to come from the Western Slope? But the gap is coming unless we, don't grow, which isn't something that it seems to be on the table. So each basin roundtable gets together. There's representation from all different kinds of water users, ag, municipal, environmental, and they talk through a lot of these problems about how the gap is going to be addressed, what's going to happen to ag, can ag become more efficient? And then you add the issues of climate change on top of it, right? The pressures of climate change. And so the South Platte Basin and the Metro Basin kind of combine efforts on a lot of our planning. And so we have what's called our South Platte Implementation Plan. And that each basin roundtable has a plan that feeds into the water plan. And so the idea is that there are these really chewy discussions about water use and what the planning needs to be in order to make sure that all of the needs are met without gutting one user. And that happens at the roundtable area. Ag is an interesting thing. We talked about our water footprint. It's a really interesting thing to chase down your food footprint. It's really easy kind of to point to ag and say how much water they're using, but they are feeding us and a lot of the world. And so simply taking water out of ag and repurposing somewhere else has a similar kind of snowball effect. And not to mention that ag owns a lot of the senior water rights out there. And so they find those very valuable. So the ag discussion is a very tricky one. They are a big user. And we, just like municipal drinkers, right, we benefit from ag. So it's kind of a big dialogue that needs to happen so that we understand that we have a footprint in each one of these areas, each of us do. And so changing one has some unintended consequences sometimes. I also just want to mention the Colorado Water Congress. This is a statewide organization that exists to kind of have some of these big dialogues. It's not supported by the CWCB the way that the roundtables are. It's kind of its own standalone nonprofit, but it really is a place for dialogue amongst different water users, different water interests. And that's another place where kind of some of these hairy conversations happen. So just wanted to mention that as well. And I think that's all I've got. So sorry, I went a little bit over, but happy to answer any questions, or I don't know how you guys, yeah, go ahead.
I might have missed this, but how many acre feet of water did you get from the 60,000 acres of water?
Oh, that's a good question. It's around 14,000 acre feet a year is kind of the average yield that comes out of those shares. So, John.
So I got statistics. The West is growing population faster than the nation. Colorado is less. So the growth is a reality, but in certain water stress areas in LA, water is so bad water, Sparks it, better water. San Antonio, San Antonio water system, Dallas, Tarrant County Water District, or Texas Water District. they've moved to a model where basically it's not just simply water suppliers, but overriding large-scale metropolitan water quality districts that meddle in both the water supply, but also work directly with utilities and set strategies for water conservation. Do you think that's going to happen in the metro area? And when is this going to happen? Because when you start looking at the costs of water and development, they're drastically less than what's going on in Colorado. And I think it has to do with sort of the power of them not setting the price as opposed to individual entities sniping at each other. So my question there is that something that's going to happen in the front, especially in the foreseeable future, or is just like the Colorado ethics so anti-collaboration that we'll never get there?
Well, it's definitely the spirit of the roundtable process is a voluntary sort of thing like that. So I don't think we have an anti-collaborative ethic. I think each supplier and the communities that we serve own water, right? They own their water rights. And so you can get people to the table to talk through collaboration and joint goals and that sort of thing. And that happens, I think, quite well at the roundtable process. We set goals around conservation. We set principles around water development. What I think is the step that's really difficult to get past is, do we actually start pooling assets and managing portfolios together collectively? And that is a very tough nut to crack because of the investments that have been made to get these supplies, and just partly because of how we have to manage water rights. So I think the roundtable process is a step there, but it probably doesn't have the teeth that you're looking for in terms of actual decision making.
That are semantics, but what you described is cooperation, not collaboration.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah.
Could I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
Hey, Mike, let's make sure all the students get questions first. If there are any other questions from the students.
There's a couple. Do you have students online too?
No, they're only in the room.
Okay, go ahead.
I was wondering about the virtual. What state is it in that area?
Can you explain to me what you mean by a virtual water market?
The idea has been around for no actuality at the moment, where things are, as far as the creative approach to, I have this and this capacity, or water treatment, water treatment things. We have all these things, and the efficiencies are lacking. So
I think it happens kind of on a small scale. I would kind of use, we have a very small cooperative arrangement at Stanley Lake with the cities of Thornton, Northland, Westminster, and a ditch company. And we have ways of kind of, I don't know that it's necessarily virtual, but kind of it is collaborating in this instance. We're sharing each other's facilities. We're in each other's storage space. We're doing exchanges that maybe aren't happening physically. So I think it happens on a small scale basis when you've got multiple entities sharing facilities. The bigger one is that's a tough nut. And it kind of goes back to John's point, I think a little bit, that it's, in theory, you can get engineers drawing things and pointing lines and saying what would make perfect sense if there weren't all of these obstructions, but getting it to practice is a tough one. So yeah.
I'm curious if your team has looked at like return flows from the ag and how that would be affected if all of that is just diverted straight to port.
So our decree, and all agricultural transfer decrees, except the really old ones that are held by kind of Denver Water, require that we maintain those historic return flows. So we have to build structures that return water back to the river. We actually have to build recharge pits along our farms so that the water can accrue back to the river the same way that it would have. So the water that we get to drink is the water that the corn consumed. That's it. All of the other kind of return water, not wastewater, but water in the ditch that, helped kind of get seeps in, that all stays in the system. And what Water Court does is it makes sure that when you change a use from agricultural to municipal, nobody should be able to tell that anything has happened. So those return flows get maintained.
Okay, so
Yeah.
those return flows do stay out east then?
They stay out east and accrue to the South Platte. We have return flows that have to accrue to the Pooter, so we have to make those as well from our Larimer County farms. So they basically go where they went historically, and we have to build structures to get them to those specific locations. Yeah, that's a great question. I don't see anybody else in here that has questions.
Go for it, Mike.
Okay, talk about water conservation and Aurora's Prairie Waters project and recycling opportunities.
Can I ask, I think you have someone from Aurora as a guest speaker, right?
Yes,
don't-
we have Tim York coming next week actually to speak all about Aurora Water and their supply and conservation efforts.
Oh, good. Well,
Yeah,
he's an expert then, so I'll defer.
Good, because I'd make stuff up.
And there was a question, what water conservation techniques, programs, land use code, et cetera, does Thornton use?
I'm super proud of our water conservation efforts. You kind of described it in two tiers. One, we've got water conservation that's targeted towards existing customers. Then we've got water conservation that is targeted new development that's coming in. So from the existing customer side, we really have one of the most robust programs out there. Turf conversion, native water-wise gardens, sprinkler system audits. Thornton actually has one of the lowest GPCDs, gallons per capita per day, of any communities in the Front Range. I think we're at about 80 gallons per capita per day. Our customers are amazing. That's on the residential side. So thorntonwater.com, you can check out all of the stuff we offer and then bug your city to do the same.
But maybe putting in the conservation program. Do you get to count that as future water supply for planning purposes?
You can if you're risky. You get to do whatever you want with it. We use it as we do not grow into that water. It's dicey because just because someone tears out their bluegrass and puts in rock doesn't mean that the next owner doesn't come back in and put bluegrass in. So cities like Nevada or cities in Nevada are actually putting deed restrictions and requiring that landscape stay there. We haven't gone down that road yet, but we use that water savings as a resiliency for climate change and drought. So it helps our buffer, but we don't sell taps on that conservation. So, and then just to the second question about new development, we are updating, we've got a landscaping code that limits the amount of turf that can be put in new developments. And we're actually revising that to kind of make it more stringent, because ideally you put it in right the first time. So you don't have to have all these kind of retrofit programs. But we're trying to tackle it on both sides. But yeah, I think our customers really do a great job. Yes, sir.
You're looking at gray water recycling?
So we do reuse in kind of a different way. We recapture our wastewater effluent in gravel pits along the South Platte River, and then do some kind of fancy water rights exchanges to move it up. So that's what our reuse program is. We have looked at some on-site gray water technologies that exist. Like there's some technologies that I always get this wrong. I think like shower water and puts it into toilets and, so they're on site. We've looked at that. This is where Colorado Water Lab doesn't do us a lot of favors. Recycling water on a larger scale through gray water can cause some water rights issues. So we've looked at it, but it's I hate to say it, but indoor use always isn't, it's good to be efficient indoor, but there's not a ton of water to be gained in that way. So yeah, we're still kind of watching that.
Do you lease out that land that you own to farmers?
We do. So about a third of the land, so around 6,000 acres, has been taken out of irrigated ag and turned into self-sustaining grasses. That's required by our decree. And a lot of those grasses are leased to local cattle producers for grazing. And then the other 2/3 are still in irrigated ag. We release those to local farmers. A lot of them are, a few of them are actually people that we purchase the water from. So it's kind of these legacy farms. But some of the big producers that you hear about up here, a lot of them lease land from us. Yeah, so they're currently, they're the ones managing the land for us right now.
The intent is that water will be used for municipal purposes at some point.
That's right. It'll be the future supply. So that first block of the 6,000 acres that we've already put in grass, that's kind of the first water that'll go through the pipeline. And then it'll be a slow kind of ramp to get to the rest of that water as Thornton grows. And that's where the stewardship plan comes in. We're trying to figure out how to manage those lands and the irrigated ag to optimize agriculture out there as we transition the water. Yeah.
How much energy does it take to pump water at what is it, like 65 miles all the way up the Thornton?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the actual amount of energy, but
like order of magnitude?
I really don't. I'm not an energy person, but I do know that, you know, when you look at it is intensive, but nowhere near as intensive as some of the Trans Mountain diversions that move across. It's also not nearly as intensive as some of the high tech water treatment technologies that are out there to treat really degraded sources like reverse osmosis. And so that's kind of the trade-off that you're looking at. But yeah.
But I think water pumps are very efficient, and you know the density of water, and so you know the volume of water, and you pretty much calculate how much energy it takes. Given that in the spreadsheet. Yeah, no, it's basically just moving mass at like almost 90% efficiency. A good pump. Good pump. Efficiency operating. But the bigger efficiency is something swings pipes. Oh, right. So you end up having a lot of losses, a lot of pipes. You know, the city pipes, they do all of this stuff, but a lot of the general public don't realize how much energy is lost just depending on how rough.
Yeah.
And so actually going to hyperspeed pipes is fun energy.
And one of the other interesting things is most systems have a lot of pumping within the internal distribution system too. So those tanks that I was talking about, typically what's happening is you're pumping water up to those tanks from your treatment plant, and then ideally gravity feeding the rest of your entire system. But you know, any community that has hills likely has multiple pressure zones for their distribution system, and all of those there's a lot of pumping just involved with that delivery of the treated water too.
And then you have to pump water into the sewage system.
Those are usually gravity fed, but sometimes sometimes there's lift stations and stuff. So.
I have a question about kind of water quality at South Platte. Like, why is South Platte too degraded at the state boarding, but like the state of Nebraska uses water from South Platte, and that's fine? Well,
it's not too degraded. We take it. We get it. We treat it. It has PFAS in it, and we have to use advanced treatment, and having a degraded source poses risk to public health. So it's possible, but it's not ideal. Part of the reason I'm not sure how many drinking water providers take out on the South Platte below us. Aurora definitely, but you'll hear about the treatment technologies they had to put into place in order to meet that. And then I don't know that folks, I don't know Nebraska's to know if people are taking surface water, but there's a lot of, you know, the pooter comes in, there's a lot of water that comes in that kind of continues to refresh, but there's also agricultural runoff. So it's not that it's not possible, it's just that it increases public health risk and the energy cost and chemical cost in order to get that degraded source of supply to meet drinking water standards is more substantial than if you have a pristine source. Yeah.
So
yeah, thank you. Great questions, and thanks for the engagement. I appreciate it.
It's just down the road for you. So one of the things, since the subject of energy and water came up, this is a statistic most people don't know about, but when you look at this, look at the entire amount of energy stuff, electrical grid, moving, treating, collecting, heating, all of this stuff that water accounts for in the West about 20 to 25% of our energy use. And so when we start thinking about, water and energy, it's like you start looking at other types of systems, I guess you'd say. Water is the biggest energy user of any sector in the Western United
Is
States.
that net after hydro?
No, it's not net after
Okay,
hydro.
so
As soon as
that's-
hydro puts,
Yep.
like Vegas is interesting because if you actually look at it, the energy usage of water through Vegas is huge. And that's how they calculate it. It ends up being about over 25% of their total energy usage, but they're getting it.
They're
from-
generating, they're generating an
And
awful lot of it too.
But they got to pay for it, so that's what they're looking at.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emily. Appreciate it.
Good to see you, sort of.